it feels like everywhere you look, you see these stories, these headlines about communities clashing.
Yeah.
And it's often, tied to religion in some way.
Yeah, yeah.
And it makes you stop and think, like, how crucial is it really for different groups to get along, especially in a place as diverse as India?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like this whole idea of harmony, it's getting more and more fragile. I mean, you see it not just in India, but all over the world. So in this deep dive, we're going to really unpack this whole idea of communal harmony and this rise in religious intolerance, both in India and globally, based on all the research that we've done.
Absolutely. And when we talk about communal harmony in India, the research really stresses that it's not just some nice idea.
Right.
It's really the bedrock, the foundation for a country with so many different faiths.
Yeah.
Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, for all of them to really thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about like tolerating each other, passively. It's about actively building that unity and stability.
Right.
And the sources, they make it so clear. When people deliberately stir up religious tensions, it's like they're attacking the heart of the nation.
Yeah.
I mean, history is like full of examples of how this kind of division has been exploited, and it almost never ends well.
No, it doesn't. And what's interesting is the research goes beyond just, social harmony.
Hmm.
It makes a really strong link between communal harmony and economic growth.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And it makes sense, right? I
Yeah.
mean, for businesses to grow, for investors to feel secure, you need stability.
Exactly.
A country that's constantly fighting over religious differences, it's not going to attract investment or inspire confidence.
Right.
It impacts a country's whole place in the global economy.
For sure. And think about social development, too.
Yeah.
I mean, if communities are always at odds, where's the energy? Where's the trust to work together on things like education, healthcare, or social reforms?
Right.
You need that foundation of understanding.
Yeah.
And when intolerance chips away at that, the whole society suffers.
The stakes are high.
Yeah, really high.
Okay, so we get why communal harmony is so important, especially for a place like India, but what's really key and what our sources dig into is why are we seeing this increase in intolerance? What's driving it?
Well, one major thing that pops up is political polarization. It's almost become like a strategy.
Yeah.
The sources suggest that some political parties, they see stirring up religious feelings as a way to get votes.
Uh-huh.
And that just makes the divisions in society worse. You see it in how they talk, in how they appeal to people's religious identity, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly.
It's like they're purposely creating these fault lines between
Yeah.
communities. And once those lines are there, it's like they're impossible to erase. The sources talk about how these tensions get worse through hate speech, propaganda, policies that seem to push people further apart. I mean, you probably see examples of this yourself in the news, online, just this constant, feeling of division.
Right. And on that point about creating divisions, the sources are really powerful when they talk about how the internet, especially social media, makes things so much worse.
Yeah.
This unchecked spread of misinformation, hate speech, it's like fuel on a fire.
Yeah.
It creates distrust, and sadly, it can lead to violence. It's like these platforms, they become places where extreme ideas not only exist, but they actually grow and spread.
It's scary to think about the real-world effects of that.
Mhm.
The research directly connects this online activity to things like mob lynching. You see these terrible stories, and often the trigger is a rumor, a piece of misinformation that went viral online, and nobody stopped to check if it was even true.
Yeah. And it's not just outside forces. The material points to the role of religious extremism within communities themselves. Radical ideologies, whether they come from the majority or the minority, they fuel intolerance. And they can lead to conflict and violence. It's like a total rejection of the idea of living together peacefully.
It's like everyone's digging in their heels. It's harder and harder to find common ground.
Exactly.
And to make things even more complicated, the sources also look at how changes in law and policy, sometimes unintentionally, can become like flashpoints between religious groups.
Right?
Things like the CAA or the debates about religious conversions, they become so charged.
Yeah.
Different religious communities, they have such different interpretations, such different worries.
And what's interesting is that these changes, whatever their original purpose, can be seen as favoring one group over another.
Yeah.
And that can lead to feelings of being left out, of resentment, especially in minority communities. It just makes those existing tensions even worse.
And the information we've gathered, it paints a pretty bleak picture of the effects of all this. There were reports of more mob lynchings, attacks on places of worship, hate crimes against religious minorities. It's awful. These aren't just numbers. This is real harm to real people.
Right.
And it erodes the trust between communities. It's like a vicious cycle.
It is. And it's important to realize, the sources point this out, that this isn't just an India problem.
Right.
Religious intolerance, it's a global issue. It shows up differently. It has different roots in different places.
Right. So let's look at some of those global examples from the research.
Yeah.
Like in the U.S., there's a worrying rise in white supremacist groups and more Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And the sources, they connect this to religious hate crimes and also, importantly, to the influence of certain political rhetoric, certain policies. It really highlights how leaders, how the stories a society tells itself can shape how tolerant it is.
Absolutely. And in Europe, they've had this influx of refugees and a rise in nationalism. And unfortunately, that's created an environment where discrimination against Muslims and Jewish communities is more common in places like France and Germany.
Yeah.
It's this complex mix of social anxieties, economic pressures, political ideologies.
And then in the Middle East, the sources point to the ongoing sectarian violence between Sunni and Shia groups, and also the constant threat of religious extremism.
Yeah.
These are deep-rooted conflicts that are devastating the whole region.
Absolutely. And if we shift to Asia, the situation in China, it's pretty concerning. The sources detail the persecution of Uyghur Muslims and all these restrictions on religious freedom for Christians and Buddhists, too.
Right.
It looks like the government is trying to have a lot of control over religious practice.
And the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, that stands out as just a horrific example. The sources show how extreme religious and ethnic intolerance can lead to human rights abuses on a huge scale and to entire populations being forced from their homes.
It's terrifying.
It's a stark reminder of what can happen when these divisions are allowed to grow unchecked.
Absolutely. And what's striking when you look at all these different examples from around the world is that even though the specific situations and triggers are different, this core theme of intolerance, this idea that people who are different are dangerous, it keeps coming up.
Yeah.
It really underlines how universal this problem is.
Okay, so we've looked at the problem from lots of angles in India and globally. Now the question is, what can we do about it? Our sources do offer some potential solutions, some ways to try and curb religious intolerance.
Yeah, they do. One key thing they highlight is the need for stronger laws.
Okay.
And it's not just about having laws against hate speech.
Right.
It's about actually enforcing them, making sure people who commit hate crimes face real consequences. There has to be a real deterrent.
It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If there's no real punishment for spreading hate or inciting violence, why would people stop?
Exactly.
The sources also talk about the importance of education. How can schools help promote understanding and tolerance?
The idea is to build bridges of understanding early on by having classes that teach about different religions, by encouraging dialogue between faiths, by focusing on the shared values that so many religions have at their core.
Yeah.
It's about teaching empathy and breaking down stereotypes from a young age.
That's a long-term solution, right?
Yeah.
Planting those seeds early.
Exactly.
The sources also mention the responsibility of the media. In this age of constant news, how can the media contribute to better relationships between faiths?
The sources call for the media to be more responsible in how it reports on religious issues, to avoid sensationalism, to focus on facts, to be unbiased. The way a story is told, it can really affect how the public sees things.
Yeah.
It can either make tensions worse, or it can help people understand each other.
That's so true. Chasing clicks and views by sensationalizing things, that can have really harmful consequences when it comes to relationships between different religious communities.
For sure.
So what about at a more local level? What can communities themselves do to build harmony?
This is where community engagement comes in. The sources suggest things like interfaith dialogues, cultural exchange programs, celebrating religious festivals together.
Okay.
These kinds of direct interactions can break down barriers,
Yeah.
help people connect, remind them that we're all human, regardless of our religion.
It's about creating those opportunities for people of different faiths
Yeah,
to actually meet each other, to see each other as people, not just as members of another group.
exactly.
Finally, the sources talk about political accountability. What does that look like in practice?
It means holding politicians and other leaders accountable for using inflammatory language, for
Yeah.
pushing divisive policies.
Yeah.
There have to be consequences for people who intentionally sow discord for political gain. That could mean public pressure, scrutiny from the media, even legal action in some cases.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, right?
Yeah.
Stronger laws, education, responsible media, community initiatives, political accountability, all of these working together to push back against this rising intolerance.
Exactly. And as the sources make clear, communal harmony isn't just a nice idea, it's essential for India to progress, for the world to be stable.
Right.
This rise in religious intolerance, it's driven by a complex mix of political, social, and economic factors.
Yeah.
But to tackle it, we need everyone to work together, governments, communities, individuals.
It really highlights that keeping the peace, building understanding, it's not someone else's job.
It's on all of us.
It's a responsibility we all share. Governments need to create fair and just systems. Communities need to build bridges. And each of us needs to look at our own biases and promote respect for others.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all human, that a society where everyone feels safe, valued, respected, that benefits everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. We've seen how interconnected these instances of religious intolerance are, how the challenges in one part of the world reflect the challenges in another. So how can your actions, your understanding, at a local level, how you treat people from different backgrounds in your daily life, how can that contribute to global harmony?
It's a great question.
And on the flip side, how might these global stories of division affect the relationships between communities where you live?
It's something to really consider.
It's something to